Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 17th of March, and happy St. Patrick's Day to all of those who celebrate. We had a funny chat in the chat box here. Apparently, some people have never even heard of the name Patrick before, and there are others who celebrate. So, if you do celebrate, happy St. Patrick's Day. This is Index Office Hours 248, which is a huge number, and it's so great to see every week. We are going up and are consistently here every single week, talking about all things Indexer. If you're new to Indexer Office Hours, this is the town square where graph ecosystem participants come together and have discussions that are relevant for indexers. As always, as I like to say, this is a conversation, and we do love participation. So feel free to get involved in today's conversation via voice or text. If you have any challenges with your voice, do let me know, and I will get that sorted for you. And a reminder before we get started with today's session: this is recorded, so if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. We're going to be distributing this onto public channels like YouTube. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Where is Carlos? Is Carlos in the house?
I am Carlos. I am Carlos for today.
You are Carlos for today. We love to see it. Okay, well, I will hand over to Juan for the Repo Watch section.
To Carlos, not to me. I am Carlos, not Juan. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah, joking.
Juan lost.
Juan lost. Okay. It's not my forte, Repo Watch, but I'll try to make it brief. So for Repo Watch, we have a couple things to cover. First, there's 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗪 has a new release, which includes some minor updates and performance enhancements with no critical changes or urgent actions required for any operations. So that's fine. 𝗨𝗀𝗪 version 1.11.3 has a quite critical update, which is required for system stability. It mostly addresses a panic issue in sparse tree-proof workers. All users, especially payload builders, must upgrade to this version to ensure operational stability. Existing node errors may persist until a specific repair process is executed. So again, if you're running 𝗨𝗪, please update. This is a critical upgrade. For 𝗨𝗪𝗂𝗪, there's a new release, which is version 2.16.2. Which fixes substream support for application gRPC web, with some enhancements in compatibility and performance for request. This is a yellow urgency, which is again important for performance, not entirely critical. Again, if you have the time, please upgrade. Let's see, consensus layer clients. There's no updates. GraphStack. There seems to be some updates on the GraphStack, mainly to the indexer service and tab agent. There's for indexer services version 2.0.1, which seems to have fixed a hard-coded size limit. An indexer tab agent also has the same version 2.0.1. So if you were having some issues with that, please update. It doesn't seem that there are any Launchpad stack updates, so that's pretty much all for Repo Watch. So I'm going to be handing over to myself for Protocol Watch, which is also a quite short one. There was only an update in forum governance for 𝗨𝗪76. There was a little bit of a discussion / clarification from REM on the 𝗨𝗪76 issuance allocator contract to split issuance across distribution targets. I'm not entirely sure. Are we taking a look at that in the open discussion section? I think maybe. Probably, hopefully. Then for forum research, we don't have any new updates. For contract suppository, also no new updates since last.ioh. Same goes for the network subgraphs. So that's pretty much it for both sections. Handing over to Abel now.
Alrighty, Mr. Juan Wick. Thank you, sir. Could you remind me what you mentioned about open discussion?
I was saying that I'm not entirely sure if REM is going to be participating in the open discussion today. Okay, that's pretty much it.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for tapping into the Protocol Watch and Repo Watch. And thank you, Juan, for so generously doing both sections. As many of you know, last week we had the good fortune of inviting Rem to IOH to discuss the JIPs. And that was a very fruitful conversation. He learned a lot about what you guys thought, and it was a nice back and forth. And so he has this prepared information about the JIP. And we also have Ford with us, who's going to be helping us out too as well. So without further ado, Rem, feel free to take it away.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Brilliant. Okay, so there are actually a few of us here. It's not just me, but I will start by presenting some material to help facilitate the discussion. But there are several of my colleagues here. So we've got Ford and Samuel and Miguel. I think they're all here. Let me just check actually. Yeah. So if you have any questions for any of them, I think actually right now at the beginning of the call is a good time to tell us if you have any specific questions that you want answered in this session, because otherwise I might end up presenting something and you get to the end and you say, well, actually, that wasn't what I was so interested in. I wanted a different question answered. So I'll just go a little pause, see what people come up with in the chat after you've been thinking about it. And last week, I can tell thinking from my perspective, last time it was sort of a little bit of an ad hoc discussion about what the GIPs are. So they 5 GIPs published. They weren't all original just before then, but they've all had a bit of a refresh. Some of them were from October last year. Some of the underlying material comes from even further back than that. But I got the impression from that, okay, we had a little bit of a talk through what each GRP meant, but perhaps it didn't feel so clear what the process looked like for an indexer. I tried to, and I have to admit quite hurriedly using AI, put together some slides showing what the process is like. I've also got some slides that a little bit outline what all the contracts are and the relationships between them, if that might be of interest. So Josh has a question already. Good. So it would be good to know what in particular needs to be covered when the UI goes offline. Is there a list of chains, how many subgraphs on them, how many queries they are getting, etc. So Josh, when you say UI goes offline, is this sort of thinking about the migration away from the upgrade indexer to indexing being supported by the decentralized network? Is that what you meant by that? I'm not sure what that question means actually. Yes. Okay. So just to clarify, this isn't any user interface going down. Subgraph Studio will still exist. And in fact, we are doing our best to actually be improving the user experience as we go through every step of this. So Subgraph Studio is not going away. What we're moving away from was where we had this big centralized infrastructure of the upgrade indexer that was a bit of a liability, right? We didn't want to be competing against the network, earning indexing the rewards for it. If we had, we would have, they would have probably paid for them, but we felt that would have unfairly distorted the network against indexes. So we've ended up with this infrastructure that's long overdue to get rid of. And I will, so when it goes offline, so if there's a list of chains or how many subgraphs on them, how many queries they are getting, I don't have I do know some very rough numbers. I'm not sure if I really have a list per se. It might be Ford can answer a little bit more in detail when we get going.
I'll try to pull some more detailed numbers while we're chatting, but I don't have any off the top of my head, but we'll see what I can do right now.
Yeah, okay, great. So the next question that comes up is, would it be interesting to get someone from the team who runs the upgrade index so that they can give us insights on what needs to be offloaded and when? Interesting question. It might be one that might be one we do come back to. Essentially, we want to do it pretty quickly, but we also balance that with actually we want to make sure it's the process works for everyone concerned. Ultimately, we don't want it to be an upgrade indexer at all. So it in one sense that answers the question. And yeah, and Abel's also saying, yeah, I think Ford could speak to that. And yes, UI is a bit of a loaded acronym. Okay, I'm going to start then by talking you a little bit through what the process looks like. It might be we go a little deeper into some of those questions as a result. We'll see how it goes. I guess I should share my screen. Okay, so the first slide, I don't want to go over this a lot unless people have questions, because I kind of feel it overlaps a lot with what we talked about last week. But just a quick reminder, so there are a number of GIPs put out. There's three that I would describe as really being more about the core protocol. There's a rewards manager upgrade, there's the eligibility oracle, and there's the issuance allocator. You will see in some of the other diagrams how these fit together. I'm just sort of listing what the GIPs are. And then there's a couple that were more specifically related to indexing payment, the on-chain agreements one, and then GIP 88 is a bit of a combination of, actually there's quite a few components here, and there are some specific decisions on how to configure that we have a proposal for, so therefore it stands as its own GIP. So I'm going to start first walking through this a little bit, right? So how protocol funded indexing agreements work end to end, very briefly, and this might be a bit small for some of you, but basically you think of it very roughly as it starts in Subgraph Studio, so that, like I said, the user interface is not going away. We have this off-chain component that looks at all the indexing being performed, and based on that and balancing the network, distributes indexing agreements to indexes, right? So it performs indexer selection essentially. It posts an agreement in what here's abbreviated RAM, basically the recurring agreement manager, because this is all based on indexing payments that are paid on the basis of a recurring agreement to pay for the indexing. There is both, it's posted on chain, there's still an off-chain notification. I'll probably talk about that a little bit more later. The indexer will typically, we hope, accept that agreement, and subsequently to that end up collecting. So does that make sense for scope to discuss? I'm not expecting you to understand all of the steps from that, but just understanding the scope of what I'm going to start with. I'll take that as yes. If Vince is typing, it must mean yes. Okay. Step one in the process is really we've figured out that a subgraph needs indexing. The developer publishes the subgraph in Subgraph Studio, and 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀, this off-chain component, responds by selecting indexes and offering agreements to get the subgraph indexed. And there will be a little spot later where we can talk a little bit about what that criteria is, or it might be we have covered it before. It might not be what we want to go as deep in today. And one of the things is, like I described before, today the upgrade indexer handles this centrally, and with this combination of, it's not really just the GRPs, it's quite a few components have been developed together so that the protocol itself can fund and manage indexing through those agreements. So Vince says, I'm curious on the accept portion and how automated it will be, but I'm guessing that will explain soon. There will be definitely a spot to ask that question in more details soon. So hold that thought. So 𝗨𝗃𝗃𝗀. Basically, I'm not even sure if this is 100% correct. But essentially, 𝗨𝗃𝗃 will select indexes based off a scoring algorithm that is designed to both meet the needs of all participants on the network. So from one perspective, make sure that we get high quality indexing done by indexes that are serving queries, for example. And on the other side, making sure that indexes get a fair proportion of the work, both for indexing and then of course that leads to subsequently the queries as well. And the 𝗨𝗃𝗃 then creates an agreement for that, so sets the agreement terms based on what's required. It posts this agreement on chain, but it also notifies the indexer off chain that it has been posted. It's partly a consequence of how we got to this stage, to be honest, but it's also has a very useful role in terms of making sure that the notification is prompt. Because remember, one of the earlier points I said is actually for all the work we're doing, we're trying to improve the user experience and the proposition for users. One of those is obviously how quickly something starts getting indexed. If we make too many steps in the process where that message is slow to propagate, obviously that experience from the user's point of view is going to be slow. Now, Vince is curious on the accept portion and how automated it will be. And it is our hope, actually. This is one of the areas where obviously we have to work with you. We sort of have a prototype in the way it works, that basically the acceptance is automatic, right? That if you have posted your prices and you have the capability to do this work and you get sent this agreement, this isn't something you as an indexer want to probably be manually involved in, and it wouldn't be good for the response time. So the expectation and the design is that actually that automatically triggers you to create an allocation if you need it, accept the agreement, and start indexing it in Graph Node. So that's a very short, simple explanation. Vince, is there more you want to ask on that?
I guess I'll just unmute. That makes it easier. Yeah, I guess just my main question was just like, yeah, like how automated it'll be, and then like, what kind of parameters we can base that automation off of. Because I'm sure people will have different ideas of what they want to accept. So that way, it's not like checking your inbox every morning, seeing what you should be accepting, and more so like, oh, I guess I'm, serving this and that, and I didn't have to do anything, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I guess the principle for that interaction, and actually, I do have a slide on this a little bit later. Let's skip straight to this, and just it's sort of a more visual representation of something I did already kind of say, right? So DIPA offers the agreement. So RCA is recurring collection. Recurring agreement to the recurring agreement manager. This part I did not cover yet. So basically, the recurring agreement manager is funded by the protocol. It's actually nobody else is able to withdraw funds from it, but it uses its funds to manage the escrow and the payments. So it deposits GRT in the payments escrow. As a generic mechanism, this was also how the off-chain flow worked. In this on-chain flow, of course, there is an additional level of transparency and predictability, because you can see what the contract does, what it's you can see how many funds it has available. You can see its life cycle, and you basically can have more confidence that it just keeps running as designed and doesn't suffer an outage like an off-chain component is more liable for. Then, as I mentioned before, DIPA does also send the unsigned proposal off-chain to the indexer. You could discover it on-chain. Like we say, that's not what we're expecting you to respond to, because you'll get this notification earlier. You can check it on-chain, of course, because we say you've been offered this agreement. You can check that's the case if you want. But this agreement, and let me just check if one of my subsequent diagrams. No, subsequent diagrams don't go more detail into this aspect. But I think this will be automated. That's how we're designing it. And the reason it can be is you will have published your prices. We won't have offered you something if it falls below what you're willing to offer. And Miguel could probably go into more detail here. He's actively working on the implementation and iterating the design as he goes. But I'd expect in the general case, you might get offers not just from the DIPA, but you could get it from another party, and you would generally look if the agreement's terms are satisfactory to you. So that can be an automated comparison against the prices you have set, right? If it falls below the prices you've set, then you say, well, no, I didn't advertise. I would do indexing at this price, and I'm not accepting it. In the case of the DIPA, we're not going to be sending you something that falls below those prices anyway. yeah. So, okay, so there's a question here. Will there be a blacklist when someone may meet those requirements, but I hate it because it was built badly? It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what the requirement for that would be initially. Probably initially it'll be set up that if it's from it, we could give you a very simple approval list and say, well, Dipper is a trusted source of these. We don't yet see a lot of people doing this, so if it comes to the stage that someone wants to do this, would have to work out how exactly the semantics of that work. And it's worth noting that the basic components that support this mechanism are not tied to the subgraph service. It can be another data service as well. Yeah, so there can be, the message is there can be particular subgraphs you don't want to index. I think the risk here, I'll say lower. It's different. In some ways you might more correctly say different rather than lower, but I think in terms of what's inspiring that comment, if you are asked to index something that just takes an inordinately amount of compute to index, you can bound the effort you put into indexing it to what the agreement will support. And if you can't complete it, you can claim for what you have done. And if the offer is not increased, then it's just not enough to perform that indexing. So it takes you away from the scenario that you might currently have where you think, well, I'm going to try and index the subgraph, but I might fail and waste all the effort and therefore not be able to claim rewards. So indexing agreements don't work that way, because it's okay, you can claim this much to index it, and if it's not enough to complete the indexing, then it's not enough to complete the indexing, and you can stop there and claim for the work you have done. So hopefully that answers why that's less of a risk than you might imagine in this setup. So, and Vince, I would want to do it from the get-go. I'll eat 9 terabyte for the say. Yeah. Now, hopefully that's I've just answered that question, right? You're not going to have all your resources consumed by something you don't get paid for, basically. How is effort measured? So this is basically there's a formula. The 2 layers of it, but essentially you and who's actually I wonder if Miguel or even Samuel or Ford wants to go into a little bit more detail here, because I know this actually quite a relatively abstract level compared to my colleagues here.
Yeah, Samuel's probably spent the most time on this, so maybe he could jump in. Samuel, you wanna hop on that one? Yeah.
So the dipper, just kind of to explain the flow, and hopefully I'm not repeating anything. Then the dipper is, after it gets a query from the Subgraph Studio, it's taking that query and passing it to the IISA. which has scored the indexes based on its scoring algorithm. Oh, sorry, I see. Is my
Yeah,
audio not so?
your audio is fine. Just by the way, I probably handed it over without specifically telling you. So it's Vince's question: how is the effort measured? So is the a bit basically about the entities and the storage cost for those entities.
Okay, yeah, understood. So there's two components to pricing. One of which is the specific chain that the subgraph is on, and then indexers can set prices for subgraphs on that specific chain independently from how big the subgraph is, and then at least initially, indexers will also be able to set how much they want to charge per entity on the subgraph. So as the subgraph grows, in size, it also typically grows in entities. It's not always a direct one-for-one correlation, but at least what we've seen when we've done the analysis is the largest subgraphs tend to have more entities, and we're kind of using that as a proxy for how large the subgraph is on disk. And then when you go to claim to collect your payment, you just submit how big the subgraph was in terms of entities, and then you're paid accordingly to how much you set in your indexer service. So that's something that you can configure ahead of time before you're even given the indexing agreement.
Yeah, so it's worth noting there's an interesting dynamic here, because basically we don't know how much work it's going to be involved, and you as an indexer, you actually tell us, right? You say, well, I offer my services based on this price per entity per second. You index something and you tell us how many it was. Now, if you misreport, you can be slashed. Now, there's proof of indexing involved, etc. But we don't actually know in advance how much that's going to be.
Yeah, and maybe just another thing to note is that it's quite difficult to reason about entities per second because subgraphs have billions of entities, and then obviously a payment in second is an extremely small unit of time. And then GRT itself is denominated in ways, so 18 decimals. So it's something that we've done to kind of make that a bit easier for indexers when they're reasoning about that is they can just set the amount of GRT they want per billion entities per month. And then, at least from our analysis, we've seen that on average, a billion entities is around 600 or so gigabytes on disk. So yeah, you can just kind of think about how much you would need to charge in order to make storing around about 600 gigabytes worth it in terms of payment.
Hopefully that answers your question, Vince. I'm going to let me skip a few slides. I can see we're probably going to run out. It's probably worth completing this side of the flow. From an indexer's point of view, some of this looks quite similar, but there are important differences. But so some of it looks quite similar to what happens with rewards. Right, so you collect with the proof of indexing. The subgraph service actually validates the agreement and amount. So it's you've actually, when you collect, you actually, as I said before, say how much work was involved, and based on the price that was set in the agreement, a subgraph service can then calculate how much it is. The recurring collection agreement actually has an inbuilt cap as to how much that can be up to. So this is the thing about you need to bound the work you do to the what the agreement supports. but provided it's within that, it can take that GRT from ESCO and use the graph payments contract to distribute that, right? So there's protocol tax, delegation rewards, and the payment that goes back to the index. So a lot of it looks very similar to indexing rewards, but some of the details in the middle are different in important ways. So, and then Vince asked, so do less then, so that no Uniswaps get picked up? Look, I think there will be a cycle that we work through together for some of the extreme subgraphs that they just don't get indexed, right? It's like, okay, it takes too much work. We discover that, right? As our logic about it improves, it might be, oh, well, wasn't quite enough, but the progress is sufficient to justify paying the rest. Okay, we can increase the agreement, or it's just too unfeasibly large. It just gets dropped, at least from the perspective of being just automatically paid for by the protocol. If someone cares about a very expensive subgraph that can still feasibly be indexed, then they can, of course, pay for it directly. They don't have the same approach as the protocol does necessarily. So of the current Studio users, how many seem to be actual entities that want to enter into DIPS? I'm trying to interpret that question. So
he's kind of continuing a conversation we're having in the chat around how much paying users there really are, and looking at query fees not being enough to pay for this. Josh, I think one option here that we're proposing is to divert some indexing rewards, so issuance, to the STIPS agreements pool, to fund this development studio where not all users are going to be paying users.
And the question on amount of time to decide to drop it, you probably have a little bit of discretion, but I would expect the default is to do as much as fits within the agreement budget, at least up to the first collection point, because there's a constraint. There are constraints on how early you can collect, and there's a constraint on how much time you can also be paid for if you delay too long. So I expect that's probably answered by you will probably index up to the amount that the agreement supports, and the system, Dipper will probably turn around and say, okay, thank you, but we don't need to continue indexing that. And okay, so two questions. Yes, Josh. Basically, it's actually a bit of at the moment it's complementary to indexing rewards, right? Because we want to make sure we have fully understood the mechanism and that it's working for everyone. But the curation mechanism doesn't work well, right? And I'd much rather, over time, transition to actually indexing payments are the mechanism through which you have the work allocated and the rest is distributed as network rewards, basically probably in proportion to stake, maybe adjusted by performance, but basically stake for all qualifying indexes, right? So every index that's actually properly participating on the network. So that allows the same amount of issuance to be distributed, but indexes to be more efficient in terms of actually doing work that's useful, and then we can then transition away from rewards. And actually, I think it also means that there is more we are able then to have the network produce in terms of value by providing other services as well, because we're not wasting so much time on indexing everything 30 times. That helps bring more people to the network. And Vince, yes, sometimes it will be wasted compute. And I think the reality of the situation is one of the best ways to find out what is worthwhile and not is to try it. It might be in time we become, well, it's likely in time we become more sophisticated than our initial mechanisms, but I do think part of the mechanism is for some things, try it and see how much work's involved, and if it's too much, that's feedback to the user. Either make your subgraph more efficient, or actually if it's absolutely necessary and you really want to do this, well, you can pay for it yourself. Can I outline the collection point constraints? Yes. So the recurring collection agreement has a minimum collection time, or a minimum seconds, and a maximum. And the minimum essentially stops fresh, right? You can't, you have to wait a reasonable amount of time between collections, not to do it at too small a level. And the maximum is, so both parties know actually this is the most that can be claimed, the most number of seconds, because there is a rate per second in the recurring agreement. Hopefully that answers it. Can I outline the collection point constraints? So what about index rewards being distributed to indexes that aren't eligible for REO? There is actually a, yeah, so basically your concern here is indexes that can't collect their rewards represent, I think, what you're concerned about is a dilution of the amount flowing to the indexes that do, because it's drawing away from them. We do have a mechanism with the upgrades. So in these GIP, there's an ability for us to set a reclaim address, so that, and we can split that by the types of reclaim as well. But basically all of the rewards that are not claimed, we can send to another contract that can use some other mechanism to distribute it. We might even propose, I have not yet, setting a reclaim address and keeping it for the time being until some point in future that we find that it's worthwhile to do something about it. It's actually very hard to figure out how much will be reclaimed. It's probably not going to be a stable, reliable supply. So it's not, so we've not built any reliance on it at the moment. Hopefully that answers that question. So the Pope is ready to be collected. So it looks like I might be a little bit behind. So I think some of this, let's see what's still.
I think that was the last question in there. This is mostly chat about pull apps. And then I put a link to that GIP in the chat if people want to see more details about the rewards proposal, which is, I guess, for people listening along, it's GIP 86.
And Vince, you have the question, just ship it to indexes that are meeting REO. Actually, if we transition to having what I call on the back of GIP 70 indexing, sorry, network rewards rather than indexing rewards, we could quite easily do that. Don't have a protocol. We don't have a proposal to do it at the moment. But it sounds like it's interesting because there are two sides here, right? So there's one side of people who quite like it just to not be minted and reduce inflation, and there's another side who say, well, you know, would actually quite like to not miss out on that distribution. And it might be that initially configuring it and deferring the decision of how the protocol is going to use it might be the middle ground, because if it's not being spent, it's not actually practically affecting inflation, right? Because inflation is actually driven by marginal supply and demand. The fact that the token's there doesn't increase marginal supply, so it kind of doesn't undermine the inflation goal, but leaves open the door that we actually do something useful to it with it. Okay, I'm not going to try and present anything new because we have 5 minutes left, and actually if we manage to finish on time answering your questions, that's great. So the 100K of free queries per month does not change as part of this proposal. Basically, it's at the moment it's still each node paying for it. Yeah, building a user-facing pricing structure for the user that's convenient for user, but in the process actually absorbing a lot of cost and variation between different users and how free users work. It's possible that might be a target for reclaimed rewards, but if we were too fixed on that design and it's volatile, right? It's not clear how well that'll work. So I'm trying to think of if there are other metrics we can use to figure out how much work subgraphs will be to index. I can assure you there have been lots of very bright minds trying to solve that. And it's actually amazingly, it's the same for queries actually, right? It's very difficult to predict. How many of those bright minds were named, Vince? Maybe we need more Vinces and we'll solve it.
Yeah, I mean, Vince, you allude to using some other systems to do some analysis ahead of time to understand how many events there are or how complex a contract is. I think we're getting into a place where we have more tools to do that kind of analysis, but it's still really hard because you don't really know what a subgraph's doing in its code. So it could be doing lots of work to filter that. It could be using a lot of compute. But I still think directionally we can make some improvements by, for instance, like doing a query to AMP to see for a contract address how many total events of each type there are. We can do some estimates based on that. It'll definitely be interesting to learn a lot as we start to implement this. Dips and indexers are a little bit more aware of like the per block cost and entity counts, and the network has better signal there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you posted the gold sky pricing, and I actually believe we should use the advantage we have of the way our network works at this stage to make the network the best, right? The combination of the most reliable, extensive, and competitive place to come for your data. And when we get to the stage that actually, and that can, in my view, include free tier stuff that's reasonably generous, because if we got to the stage that it's no longer enough, then that's a nice problem to respond to, right? That's a nice stage to have got to. Okay, so the issuance that is flowing into the network is no longer enough to support the free tier. Great, that means we've reached a certain part of demand, a certain level of demand, and we can start increasing prices. But in the meantime, yeah, we should be making the network, using it to make the network the place to come for data. Well, thank you. Hopefully I've answered the questions you have. I didn't see any pending questions we didn't get to answer. If I did miss something, please let me know. But thank you very much for your time. And always, if you have more questions, let us know.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rem, Ford, and the rest of the gang, and of course, Mr. Moonboy, as always, Sam, for guiding us there and responding to all the questions and presenting. Just a quick question, Rem, you said I'm not going to present anymore. Was there more that you wanted to present in today's conversation that perhaps maybe we could move to another one?
I probably did have some extra material, whether it's a lot of it might be an overlap in presenting some information in a different way. What I didn't really go into today so much that I had some materials on was explaining how the different contracts that are on-chain are set up and relate to each other, because I wondered if that's something that's not immediately obvious from the GIPs themselves.
Gotcha. Well, let's carve out some time next week to figure that one out. I'll coordinate with you to figure that out. Yeah, seems like people love you, man. We're getting another one from Matthew saying, "Rem again next week. We'd love to hear from you again." So, yeah, I'll coordinate with you to get that sorted. And then Matthew seems to have a question here. I have a more immediate question. I see GraphNode is removing SPS. As previously planned. However, indexing rules are still enabled on that. Maybe Slim, if you want to just chime in on that very quickly before we wrap up, if you have any thoughts. I know that we spoke about that offline as a topic we want to discuss in a future IOH, but in case you have any more immediate thoughts, it'd be great to hear perspectives.
Yeah, on substring-powered subgraphs, I'm not sure if the will the subgraph availability oracle be able to sort and disable rewards on that. I see, Miguel, you're on the call. Maybe you
Yeah,
could speak to that.
it's been a while since I looked at that, but I think yes, like one of the options when running the subgraph availability oracle is the sources, and one of the sources is soft dreams. So yeah, we can manage that through the oracle.
Yeah, we can follow up on that
Yeah.
async, but yeah, that would be ideal.
There you go. So that hopefully will get done, and there'll be some responses there. Any final thoughts, folks, before we wrap today's conversation? Alrighty. Well, in that case, I'll take the opportunity to say thank you to each and every one of you for joining today's IOH. That was a fantastic session. There you go. Claps all around, claps all around. Love to see that. And of course, we will be back again same time next week for another edition of Indexer Office Hours. There you go. The sound effect brings us into the close. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Take care, buddy. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Lizard.